How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to Sector 6, and today we're going to be having a little chat about Gilgamesh, because Gilgamesh is kind of a little side thing that goes on in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, but maybe there's something going on in there? I think it's worth looking at, especially given the way that it maybe ties into Chadley, and there's a video coming on Chadley soon as well that'll probably follow on from this. So yeah, I think we should jump into it. Like the video, subscribe for future content, but yeah, let's do this. So Gilgamesh. Where do we even start with Gilgamesh? Gilgamesh is a character that's come up in the franchise before. He originally popped up in Final Fantasy V, and then a few years later when Final Fantasy VIII came around, he was established as kind of a game-hopping character, very similar to things like Moogles and Chocobos, very much as a character that just pops up. And that fits in with Gilgamesh's character. Gilgamesh is a wandering swordsman who goes around collecting swords and being a bit weird in general. Gilgamesh is pretty weird as well. He's very much a comedy character. This is something that comes across when he pops up in Final Fantasy V for the first time. He's in a pretty important position. He is one of the main bad guys that you face throughout Final Fantasy V, but at the same time he's also ludicrous, and that carries over. He is always ludicrous whenever he shows up, and his appearance in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is no exception to that. Now, something else that is almost always the case with Gilgamesh is this connection that he has to the Genji gear. Genji gear, if you know, are usually some of the most powerful items in any Final Fantasy game, and Gilgamesh is intrinsically linked with this set of equipment. And, again, this is no different in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. The Genji gear in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth pop up as the Proto-Relics, and the Proto-Relics are part of a quest chain that Chadley sends us on. And these are part of the world intel. He keeps finding these signals around the world, and we have to go around, complete the objectives that are there, and then eventually, once we've finished the Proto-Relic quest for the area, we will get a Proto-Relic, which is a piece of the Genji gear. Now, these quests are usually something to flesh out the area as well. So, for example, the first one of them is a quest that we have around Beck's badasses, where we kind of chase them down and beat them up at different points, and by the end of it, we end up with the first Proto-Relic. Another one is in the Fort Condor quest. There's one for each area, and upon completing these quests, we get a piece of the Genji gear. And with each piece of the Genji gear that we get a cutscene with Gilgamesh. And this is where the first interesting part kicks in for me, because as we are being transported to these cutscenes with Gilgamesh, what can we see? We can see the rainbow effect that later on in the game becomes associated with traversing the worlds. So this massively suggests to me that Cloud's consciousness is being transported elsewhere. I doubt his physical body is, because the rest of the party would be like, yo, where did you just disappear to, Cloud? What's going on? What's going on? But we don't see any of that. So it suggests to me that it's just his consciousness, but it's very interesting that we see this imagery again, and it's not the last time that we'll see it. Anyway, these cutscenes generally follow the same sort of vibe, and the vibe is, oh, you've taken this piece of Genji gear, Cloud, I want it back. Cloud tells Gilgamesh to piss off, and Gilgamesh struggles a little bit, talks a little bit, but then eventually pisses off. And that is generally the way each of these cutscenes go down. In one or two of them there are some extra things though, such as, you know, we see that on the back of Gilgamesh there are two weapons. One of them is like a fake version of the Buster Sword, it looks like, and one of them is a fake version of the Nailbat, I would assume. And this fits in with Gilgamesh. He's always trying to get these legendary weapons, but he seems to always end up with a knockoff version, or a version that's not quite as good, and that's probably what we're seeing here. He does identify later on in these cutscenes that he wants the Buster Sword, but when we do eventually end up in combat with him, he never uses the Buster Sword or the Nailbat against us, not as far as I noticed. It's always one of the other weapons like the Muramasa or the Rune Axe or something like that. Another interesting thing that happens is that Gilgamesh points out that he's lost his memories. He doesn't know why he's here or what he's doing. All he knows is that he needs to get his Genji gear back, and when he does, he'll get his memories back. So that's an interesting little caveat to it, especially in a game where memories play such an important role, and the fact that these memories seem to be tied with the Genji gear explains something else that happens. So just before we get one of the Proto-Relics and go and see Gilgamesh, we get a scene with Sephiroth. And Sephiroth appears, takes hold of the proto-relic, and seems to summon Gilgamesh, but I would say that he doesn't summon Gilgamesh. I would say that he uses the whispers to recreate Gilgamesh out of the memories that are held within the Genji gear. That's my guess as to what happens. It would also explain why Chadley's able to create a Gilgamesh summon later on in the game. Same thing. So, yeah, I kind of feel like that's what's going on there. And the look on Sephiroth's face when he actually does it is quite hilarious. I don't think he expected Gilgamesh to pop out, but when Gilgamesh does pop out, he's like, haha, fun, and then just leaves. Good times for Sephiroth. So yeah, we've got Gilgamesh doing the usual thing that he always does when he pops up, hunting legendary weapons like the Buster Sword. We've got him linked massively to the Genji gear, with his memories seemingly being tied into the Genji gear itself. And then if that's not enough weird stuff going on, we just mentioned him a second ago, Chadley manages to find a way to follow Cloud into one of these visions that he's having where he meets with Gilgamesh. And that's also quite weird. And quite obviously it ends with Gilgamesh attacking Chadley, why wouldn't it? So there's a lot of weird stuff going on with this proto-relic questline in general, especially then when you factor in the fact that Gilgamesh traverses the void looking for legendary weapons, is popped up in so many different Final Fantasy games at this point, it is beyond a joke. So Gilgamesh is well established as this traveller of worlds, and he says as much when we get to the final deal with him. So eventually we get all the proto-relics, we get a cutscene where he invites us to Gilgamesh Island, inventive. We head there, we find Gilgamesh, we fight a load of different summon encounters which temper the pieces of the Genji gear, and then once we finish with all of that, Gilgamesh takes possession of them, powers himself up, does his whole morphin time thing, and reclaims his memories. And the first thing that he says is that he now remembers who he is, what he's doing, and why he's been bouncing around between dimensions. And normally, I'd think nothing of this. You know, in any other Final Fantasy game, I'd be like, oh yeah, cool, Gilgamesh is doing his shit. Standard. But in the remake project, where we've got all of this stuff with alternate realities and worlds and timelines, whatever you want to call them, we've got all of this stuff going on, we've got all these different possibilities being played out, we have travel between the worlds going on, and then we add Gilgamesh into it, who flat out says that he's traveling dimensions. He does talk about worlds as well, but he says that he flat out travels dimensions. So that establishes some sort of connection there, and Chadley gathers a lot of data about this. So I feel like this is going to end up maybe not being important. I don't think it's maybe going to be like a massive thing, but I think it points towards an answer potentially, this whole Gilgamesh thing. I got the feeling that, and I don't think we'll understand it now because we'll be lacking important bits of context that we'll probably get in part 3, but it definitely feels like this is going to be something. Maybe not something massive, but a piece of the puzzle that adds up and forms the greater whole. Anyway, at this point, Gilgamesh has got everything that he needs, and he's like, right, peace out, boys, and tries to bounce, but we're not having any of that. We challenge him, and he's very happy to go for it because he's like, oh, I'll take that Buster Sword, actually. So he's into the fight. We do the fight. The fight's very fun. It's a good fight. And when we get to the end of it, he concedes defeat, but also refers to Cloud as this realm's legendary swordsman, which Cloud says that he can't accept that title yet, and we all know why. Even Gilgamesh knows why, because he needs to take down his rival, Sephiroth. So Gilgamesh at this point says, oh, well, you can't have the Genji gear then. Yeah, you can't have that because you've not proven yourself. So prove yourself worthy and then we'll talk about the Genji gear. Okay, peace, bye. And, you know, it works. He doesn't say it like that, but that's essentially what he says. Beat your rival and then we will face off again. So that first off suggests to me that we might see Gilgamesh again in part 3. I would hope that we do. I mean, we'll probably at the very least get him as a summon, because Chadley's created that summon for us, and you only get it in the very, very end game of your playthrough of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, so it'd be nice if it pops up again in part 3, you know, so that we get a bit more use out of it. But the suggestion that Gilgamesh himself is going to pop up again is quite strong. Now, one more slightly amusing but also slightly interesting and concerning thing happens, and that's when Gilgamesh is looking for an exit. So he's looking for a dimensional rift so he can open it up and get back to his journey. And He can't find one. He can't remember where he left it. He can't remember where he left it. Until Chadley pops up and shows him exactly where it is. And that is worrying people. Chadley being able to be like, oh, there's a dimensional rift. We'll just pop that open. Let's go. That's concerning. That is a little bit concerning. Maybe it's just in connection with Gilgamesh because of the whole proto-relics thing, but the fact that Chadley is growing in power will always worry me. And we'll talk more about this in the Chadley video because there's a lot of Chadley stuff that's quite interesting. This whole ARC project that he's working on is quite interesting. We'll get to that. We will definitely get to that. But as far as Gilgamesh goes, I feel like he's put there to set us up for the whole worlds thing, because he pops up just before chapter 13. If you've done everything in a timely manner, just before you go to chapter 13, you can go to Gilgamesh Island. And it starts putting you back in mind of alternate realities, dimensions, things that we may have thought about a little bit, but that mostly get put on the back burner in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Rebirth is all about exploring the world, going through the story, setting everything up ready for chapter 13 and 14, and just connecting with Final Fantasy VII and seeing the world in a way that we didn't get to see it back in the day because it's all fleshed out and realised in 3D now. So that's very much what Rebirth, in its core, felt like it was about. And this Gilgamesh quest, the very end of it at least, feels like a good way to wrangle us back in and be like, oh yeah, remember all this stuff? Be prepared. So yeah, Gilgamesh, very much a harbinger of what's to come at the end of chapter 13, start of chapter 14, when Sephiroth introduces us to the whole concept of the worlds and everything like that. But on top of that, it also suggests a separation between what we've got going on in Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is worlds that exist within a closed system, which is the planet, and what Gilgamesh is doing, which is hopping between different dimensions completely. It feels to me like these are two separate things, not completely separate, which is why the imagery is very similar, but it's different scales of the same thing. Like, we're hopping around inside the planet, essentially, between the worlds, whereas Gilgamesh is hopping around between everything. It's a really interesting cameo, in my mind. Like, I love Gilgamesh anyway. Gilgamesh is very fun. Final Fantasy V is one of my favourite Final Fantasies. It's so underrated. If you've not played Final Fantasy V, please do. Please do. It's so good. And the Pixel remaster's great. But Gilgamesh has always been established as this character that hops about between realms and kind of does what he wants and pops up wherever Square Enix fancy making him pop up. And it's always appreciated. The fact that he's popped up in the remake project feels different. Purely because of everything that's going on around it in the remake project. You know, the question of, are we even in the OG timeline? Have we been in one of these worlds all along? How many worlds are there? How real are these worlds? And then we have Gilgamesh just hopping in like, hey, how's it going? It's a really interesting little side bit. Let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. How do you feel about Gilgamesh? Do you think we'll see Gilgamesh again in part 3? Do you think we'll see this introduction of dimension hopping become a thing? Because if we'd have just kept it to Cloud and the party seeing it, then I'd say no, because it's just a thing that's existing for Cloud, pretty much. The fact that Chadley came in and took data on it, that changes things a little bit for me. The fact that Chadley is so involved in it changes things a little bit for me. And the next video on the channel is probably going to be a Chadley video, so be prepared for that. I'm going to try and get it done in the next week. Cheeky little Chadley video. Cheeky Chadley. But yeah, let me know what you're thinking about Gilgamesh. Did you enjoy the Gilgamesh additions to the story? Do you think we'll see him again? Do you think that is the fusion sword on his back? I don't think it is. I think it's a knockoff Buster sword. But yeah, what do you think the ramifications of Gilgamesh appearing are? Do you think it's just nonsense? Do you think it's just a little fun side bit of nonsense that's never going to come up again? Or are you with me in thinking that Chadley makes it a little bit sus and gets the brain going a little bit? That's where I'm at with it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Please do like the video and subscribe for future content. But more importantly than all of that, have a great day.